Maria Santos looked at the clock on the restaurant wall. It was almost midnight, and her feet hurt so much she could barely stand. She had been working at Romano's Italian restaurant for 3 months now, and every day felt harder than the last. Her white server uniform was dirty with food stains. Red sauce from the pasta dishes had left permanent marks on her apron. No matter how much she washed it, the stains never came out completely. She wiped down the last table in her section and counted the tips in her pocket. $23.47. It was not much, but it would help pay for her tiny apartment rent. Maria sighed as she untied her apron and hung it on the hook in the staff room. Tomorrow she would do this all over again. At 24 years old, Maria had dreams that seemed very far away now. She remembered the day she graduated from music school just 2 years ago. She had studied piano for 6 years and was one of the best students in her class. Her teachers told her she had special talent. They said she could become a famous pianist one day, but that felt like a lifetime ago. The problem was money. Music school had cost so much that Maria now owed more than $60,000 in student loans. Every month she had to pay $700 just for those loans. Then there was rent for her small studio apartment, which cost $900. She also needed money for food, electricity, and her old car that always seemed to need repairs. When Maria first graduated, she tried to find work as a piano teacher or performer. She went to many auditions and sent her resume to music schools all over the city. But there were hundreds of other musicians looking for the same jobs. Some had more experience. Others knew important people in the music business. Maria had neither. After 4 months of searching with no luck, Maria's savings ran out. She had to find work fast or she would not be able to pay her bills. That is how she ended up at Romano's restaurant, carrying heavy plates and cleaning up after people who could afford to eat out every night. Mr. Romano, the restaurant owner, was a kind man in his 60s. He had owned the restaurant for 30 years and treated his workers fairly. He paid Maria $12 an hour plus tips, which was better than some other restaurants in the area. But even working 50 hours a week, Maria barely made enough money to survive. Every morning, Maria woke up at 6 o'clock in her small apartment. The place was so tiny that her bed, kitchen, and living room were all in the same space. She could touch both walls if she stretched out her arms. The apartment had one small window that looked out at the brick wall of the building next door. There was no piano, of course. Maria could not afford one, and there was no room for it anyway. Maria would make herself coffee and a piece of toast for breakfast. Then she would look at her hands, the same hands that used to create beautiful music. Now they were rough from washing dishes and carrying hot plates. Her fingernails were short and practical, not like when she was a student, and kept them just the right length for playing piano. The walk to work took 20 minutes through busy city streets. Maria would pass the concert hall where she had once performed as a student. Sometimes she would stop and look at the posters advertising upcoming shows. Famous pianists from around the world came to play there. Maria used to dream of seeing her own name on one of those posters someday. At Romano's, the lunch shift was always busy. Business people would come in for quick meals between meetings. They talked loudly on their phones and barely looked at Maria when she took their orders. They seemed to live in a different world, one where money was not a constant worry. Maria was good at her job even though she did not enjoy it. She was polite to customers and rarely made mistakes with orders. She could carry 4 plates at once and remember which table wanted extra cheese without writing it down. But inside she felt like she was disappearing a little bit each day. The hardest part was not the physical work or the rude customers. The hardest part was feeling like she was wasting her talent. At night, when Maria finally got home, she would sit on her small couch and move her fingers like she was playing an invisible piano. She would hear music in her head, beautiful pieces she used to play, but she had no way to make the sounds real. Sometimes Maria's old friends from music school would call. They would tell her about auditions they had been to or small gigs they had booked. A few had found jobs teaching music to children or playing at weddings. Maria was happy for them, but it also made her feel sad about her own situation. Maria's mother called every Sunday from their small hometown 3 hours away. She always asked the same questions. Are you eating enough? Are you taking care of yourself? Have you found any music work yet? Maria did not want to worry her mother, so she always said everything was fine. But her mother was not fooled. She could hear the sadness in Maria's voice. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Maria sat in her car in the restaurant parking lot. She was too tired to drive home right away. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized herself. The confident young musician she used to be seemed like a stranger now, but even in her darkest moments, Maria never completely gave up hope. Deep inside, she still believed that things could change. She told herself that this job was just temporary, a way to pay the bills until something better came along. She reminded herself that many famous musicians had struggled before they became successful. Maria knew she had to keep her musical skills sharp, even without a piano, so she practiced finger exercises while walking to work. She studied music theory books from the library during her breaks, and she never stopped listening to classical music on her old phone with cheap headphones. As Maria finally started her car and drove home through the dark city streets, she made herself a promise. No matter how hard things got, she would not let her dreams die completely. Somehow, someday, she would find a way back to music. She just had to keep believing and waiting for the right moment to show the world what she could do. Friday night at Romano's was always the busiest time of the week. The restaurant was full of people celebrating the end of their work week. Rich families came for dinner, and business people held meetings over expensive wine. Maria moved quickly, between tables carrying heavy trays and trying to keep up with all the orders. Tonight was special because it was Romano's monthly talent showcase. Mr. Romano had started this event 3 years ago to bring in more customers. Local singers and musicians would perform while people ate dinner. The shows were popular, and the restaurant was always packed on showcase nights. Maria had been working since 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it was now almost 8. Her section was full of well-dressed customers who ordered the most expensive items on the menu. She had been running around non-stop, and her feet were starting to hurt badly. At table 12 sat a group of 5 men in expensive business suits. They were loud and acted like they owned the place. The man at the head of the table was Richard Blackstone, a wealthy real estate developer who owned several buildings in the city. He was about 50 years old with gray hair and cold blue eyes. Everyone at the table seemed to follow his lead. Maria had served this group before. They always ordered the most expensive wine and never seemed to worry about the cost. They talked loudly about their business deals and how much money they made. They treated the restaurant staff like they were invisible, snapping their fingers to get attention and never saying please or thank you. Tonight, Blackstone had ordered a bottle of wine that cost $150. Maria had been very careful when she poured it, but the men were moving around a lot and talking with their hands. She was just filling Blackstone's glass when he suddenly turned to talk to the man next to him. His elbow hit Maria's arm, and the dark red wine splashed across his white shirt. The liquid spread quickly across the expensive fabric, leaving a large stain right in the middle of his chest. "What the hell?" Blackstone shouted, jumping up from his chair. His voice was so loud that people at other tables stopped talking and turned to look. "Look what you've done, you clumsy girl." Maria's face turned red with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me help clean that up," she said quickly, reaching for her towel. "Don't touch me," Blackstone yelled, pushing her hand away. "This shirt costs more than you make in a month. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" The other men at the table started laughing. One of them said, "Maybe she can wash dishes to pay for it." They all thought this was very funny. Maria stood there with the empty wine bottle in her hand, feeling smaller with each passing second. The whole restaurant was watching now. She could see other customers whispering to each other and pointing at her. Some were even taking pictures with their phones. "Sir, please," Maria said quietly. "It was an accident. The restaurant will pay for your dry cleaning, I'm sure." "Dry cleaning?" Blackstone laughed in a mean way. "This shirt is ruined. It's Italian silk, you stupid girl. You can't just wash out red wine from fabric like this." Mr. Romano appeared at the table looking worried and upset. He was a small man who did not like confrontation, but he cared about his employees. "Mr. Blackstone, please, let's discuss this calmly. We will take care of everything." "Take care of it?" Blackstone's voice got even louder. How are you going to take care of it? This girl is obviously not trained properly. She has no business working in a restaurant like this. Maria felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she tried hard not to cry in front of everyone. She had worked so hard to do a good job at Romano's. She was always on time, she never complained, and she rarely made mistakes. This accident could happen to anyone. Maybe you should hire people who actually belong. In the service industry, one of Blackstone's friends said with a smirk, some people just aren't cut out for real work. That's right, Blackstone agreed, looking directly at Maria with disgust. This is exactly why people like you stay in jobs like this. You don't have the intelligence or skills for anything better. Some people are just meant to serve others. The words hit Maria like a punch in the stomach. She had heard comments like this before from rude customers, but never so cruel and never in front of so many people. She thought about her college degree hanging in a frame in her tiny apartment. She thought about all the years she had spent studying music and all the beautiful pieces she could play. But none of that mattered to these men. All they saw was a waitress who had spilled wine on an expensive shirt. They had no idea who she really was or what she was capable of. Look at her, another man at the table said, pointing at Maria. She can't even speak up for herself. Probably never had a real education. Maria opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She felt frozen, like her voice had completely disappeared. The shame and anger were so strong that she could not think clearly. Mr. Romano put his hand on Maria's shoulder in a protective way. Gentlemen, please, there's no need to be so harsh. Accidents happen in every restaurant. Accidents happen when you hire unqualified people, Blackstone shot back. I eat at the finest restaurants in this city, and I've never had service this poor. More customers were staring now. Maria could hear people at other tables talking about what was happening. Some looked sorry for her, but others seemed to enjoy the drama. She felt like she was on display, like an animal in a zoo. Clean this mess up, Blackstone ordered, pointing at the wine that had spilled on the table and floor. And bring me a new shirt from somewhere. I have an important meeting after dinner. Maria bent down to start cleaning up the spilled wine, her hands shaking slightly. As she wiped the dark liquid from the floor, she could hear the men at the table continuing to make jokes about her. They were not even trying to keep their voices down. Probably dropped out of high school, one of them said with a laugh. Or maybe she went to one of those community colleges, another added. You know, the kind where anyone can get in. Maria squeezed the towel tighter in her fist. If only they knew that she had graduated from one of the best music schools in the country. If only they knew about all the competitions she had won, and all the praise she had received from her teachers. But how could she tell them that now? They would never believe her, and even if they did, they probably would not care. As Maria finished cleaning and walked back toward the kitchen, she could still hear Blackstone's voice behind her. He was telling his friends about how hard it was to find good help these days. He said that working-class people just did not have the same standards as people from better backgrounds. In the kitchen, Maria leaned against the wall and took deep breaths. She had never felt so humiliated in her entire life. Part of her wanted to take off her apron and walk out of the restaurant forever. But she needed this job. She had bills to pay and nowhere else to go. Maria looked at her reflection in the stainless steel surface of a refrigerator. Her face was still red and her eyes were watery. She looked exactly like what those men thought she was, just a waitress, who did not matter. But deep inside she knew they were wrong. She was so much more than they could ever imagine. Someday, somehow, she would prove it. Maria stayed in the kitchen for a few minutes, trying to calm down after the embarrassing incident with the wine. She splashed cold water on her face and took several deep breaths. She could not afford to lose this job, no matter how badly those men had treated her. When she returned to the dining room, she tried to avoid looking at table 12, but she could still hear Blackstone's loud voice carrying across the restaurant. He seemed to enjoy being the center of attention and was telling stories about his successful business deals. Maria focused on her other tables, taking orders and serving food with a forced smile. But she could not stop thinking about what had happened. The words "people like you" kept repeating in her head. What did that mean exactly? People who worked hard? People who came from families without money? People who had to struggle to pay their bills. About 30 minutes later, as Maria was serving dessert to an elderly couple, she heard Blackstone's voice again. This time he was talking even louder than before, making sure everyone in the restaurant could hear him. "My son just performed at Carnegie Hall last month," Blackstone announced proudly to his table. "He's only 22, but he's already being invited to play with some of the best orchestras in the country." Maria's hand trembled slightly as she set down the dessert plates. Carnegie Hall was one of the most famous concert halls in the world. Every serious musician dreamed of performing there someday. "That's incredible," one of Blackstone's friends replied. "He must be extremely talented." "Oh, he is," Blackstone said with a satisfied smile. "But talent isn't everything. You need the right training, the right connections, the right family background. Real talent is bred, not learned. It's something you're born with, something that runs in good families." Maria felt her stomach twist into knots. She remembered all the hours she had spent practicing piano as a child, all the sacrifices her family had made to pay for her lessons. Her parents had worked extra jobs to afford her music education. They believed in her talent and her dreams. "These working-class kids today," Blackstone continued, gesturing dismissively with his wineglass, "they think they can just dream their way to success. They watch movies and think anyone can become a star with enough practice, but that's not how the real world works." The other men at the table nodded in agreement. One of them said, "Exactly. There's a reason why the best musicians come from the best families. It takes generations to develop that kind of refined taste and ability." Maria was clearing tables nearby, but she moved closer so she could hear every word. She wanted to understand exactly what these men thought about people like her. "I see it all the time in business," another man added. "People from ordinary backgrounds try to compete with us, but they just don't have what it takes. They lack the sophistication, the education, the natural ability that comes from good breeding." Blackstone laughed and raised his glass. "Exactly. You can't teach class, and you certainly can't teach real talent. Either you have it or you don't." Mr. Romano appeared at their table with a nervous smile, trying to keep his wealthy customers happy. "Speaking of talent," he said, "we actually have a small piano over in the corner. My grandmother used to play it years ago. Maybe someone would like to perform tonight for our talent showcase." Maria looked toward the corner of the restaurant where an old upright piano sat covered with a dusty cloth. She had noticed it before, but had never seen anyone play it. The instrument looked forgotten and unused, just like her own musical dreams. "A piano?" Blackstone looked over at the old instrument and laughed. "That old thing probably doesn't even work anymore. Besides, I bet none of your staff could even play chopsticks properly." His friends burst out laughing at this comment. They seemed to find the idea of restaurant workers having musical ability absolutely hilarious. "You're probably right," one of them said between laughs. "These people are here because they couldn't make it in the real world. If they had any real talent, they'd be using it instead of serving food." Maria felt her cheeks burning with anger and shame. She gripped her serving tray so tightly that her knuckles turned white. These men had no idea what they were talking about. They assumed that because someone worked in a restaurant, they must not have any other skills or abilities. "Oh, I'm sure some of them think they're talented," Blackstone said with a cruel smile. "They probably went to their little local music classes and got told they were special. But there's a big difference between community center talent and real, professional ability." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with each man trying to outdo the others with stories about their own children's achievements and their opinions about class differences in society. They talked about expensive private schools, exclusive music teachers, and connections in the entertainment industry. Maria listened to every word, feeling more and more frustrated with each passing minute. These men had been born into wealthy families and had every advantage in life. They had never worried about paying rent or student loans. They had never worked multiple jobs just to survive. Yet they acted like their success was entirely due to their own superior abilities. As the evening went on, other customers began to leave, but Blackstone's table seemed settled in for a long night. They ordered more wine and continued their loud conversation about success, talent, and the differences between social classes. Maria served them their coffee and dessert, moving like a ghost around their table. They barely looked at her, as if she was just part of the furniture. To them, she was invisible, just another working person who did not matter in their world. But as Maria listened to their conversation, something began to change inside her. The humiliation and shame she had felt earlier started to transform into something else, determination. These men thought they knew everything about talent and success. They thought they understood what it meant to be worthy of respect. They were wrong about so many things. When Blackstone made another comment about people like her, Maria felt a spark of anger that she had not felt in a long time. For months, she had been trying to make herself invisible, to just get through each day without causing trouble. But these men had pushed her too far. They had insulted not just her, but everyone who had ever struggled to make their dreams come true. As Maria walked back toward the kitchen with empty plates, she glanced again at the old piano in the corner. The dusty instrument suddenly looked different to her. Not forgotten and useless, but full of possibilities. She thought about all the beautiful music locked inside that piano, waiting for someone to set it free. For the first time in months, Maria felt something stirring inside her chest. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten, the feeling of knowing she had something special to offer the world. These men thought they knew what real talent looked like. They thought they understood who deserved success and who did not. Tomorrow night, Maria decided, she would show them exactly how wrong they were. She would prove that talent and dreams could not be measured by the size of someone's bank account or the prestige of their family name. She would remind herself and everyone else in that restaurant who she really was beneath the stained apron and tired smile. The old piano in the corner seemed to be calling to her, waiting patiently for the moment when its voice would finally be heard again. The restaurant was finally empty except for Maria and the cleaning crew. It was past midnight and most of the staff had already gone home. Maria had finished all her side work, cleaning tables, restocking salt shakers, and counting her tips for the night. She should have left an hour ago, but something kept her there. She stood near the kitchen door, looking out at the quiet dining room. The old piano in the corner seemed to glow under the dim lights. The dusty cloth that covered it looked almost silver in the darkness. For the first time since she had started working at Romano's, Maria felt drawn to that forgotten instrument. Mr. Romano was still in his office, doing paperwork for the night. He always stayed late on busy evenings to count the money and prepare the bank deposit. Maria could see the light on under his office door. She knew he was a good man who cared about his employees, even if he sometimes seemed overwhelmed by the business. Maria walked slowly across the empty dining room toward the piano. Her footsteps echoed softly on the tile floor. As she got closer, she could see that the instrument was older than she had first thought. The wood was dark and scratched in places, but it looked solid and well made. She reached out and touched the dusty cloth that covered the keys. The fabric was soft and heavy, probably expensive when it was new. Carefully, Maria lifted one corner of the cloth and peeked underneath. The piano keys were yellowed with age, but they looked complete. None appeared to be broken or missing. "Beautiful, isn't it?" a voice said behind her. Maria jumped and turned around quickly. Mr. Romano was standing there with a gentle smile on his face. He was holding a cup of coffee and looked tired but peaceful. "I'm sorry, Mr. Romano," Maria said quickly. "I didn't mean to touch anything. I was just curious." "It's okay," he said, walking over to stand beside her. "I don't mind. That piano has been here for 15 years and nobody ever pays attention to it anymore." Mr. Romano set down his coffee cup and helped Maria remove the cloth completely. Underneath was a beautiful upright piano with carved wooden details and brass pedals that had turned green with age. Even in the dim light, Maria could see that it was a quality instrument. "My grandmother brought this piano from Italy in 1962, Mr. Romano explained, running his hand along the smooth wooden surface. "She played it every Sunday after family dinner. The whole restaurant would get quiet, and she would play the most beautiful songs. Opera, classical music, old Italian folk songs that made everyone cry." Maria listened carefully as Mr. Romano talked about his grandmother. She could hear the love and sadness in his voice. This piano clearly meant a lot to him and his family. She died 10 years ago, he continued. After that, nobody in the family could play. We covered it up and just left it here. I couldn't bring myself to sell it or give it away. Too many memories, you know? Why don't you have musicians play it during the talent showcase? Maria asked. Mr. Romano shrugged. Most of the performers who come here bring guitars or want to sing with a microphone. Nobody seems interested in piano music anymore. And to be honest, I'm not even sure if it still sounds good. It hasn't been tuned in years. Maria looked at the keys and felt her fingers tingling with the desire to touch them. She had not played a real piano in almost 6 months. At music school, she had practiced 4 hours every day. Now her hands felt stiff and out of practice. Would it be okay if Maria started to ask, then stopped herself. What was she thinking? She was just a waitress here. She had no right to ask to play Mr. Romano's family piano. If you what? Mr. Romano asked kindly. Nothing, Maria said, shaking her head. I should go home, it's late. But Mr. Romano was looking at her with curious eyes. Maria, can I ask you something? Where did you go to school? The question surprised her. In 3 months of working at Romano's, nobody had ever asked about her education or background. She was just another server, invisible and unimportant. I went to Berklee College of Music, Maria said quietly, not sure if she should be admitting this. Mr. Romano's eyes widened with surprise. Berklee? That's one of the best music schools in the country. What did you study? Piano performance, Maria said, feeling embarrassed about the contrast between her education and her current job. Piano performance, Mr. Romano repeated slowly. And you've been working here for 3 months, serving food and cleaning tables. Maria nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was afraid she might start crying if she tried to explain how she had ended up here. Mr. Romano was quiet for a long moment, looking back and forth between Maria and the piano. Finally, he walked over to the bench and dusted it off with his hand. Sit, he said simply. Mr. Romano, I couldn't. The piano probably doesn't even work properly. Sit, he repeated, more firmly this time. Please, I want to hear what my grandmother's piano sounds like with someone who actually knows how to play it. Maria hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked over to the bench. She sat down carefully and adjusted the height. The bench was comfortable and sturdy, just like the ones she remembered from music school. She placed her hands on the keys, but did not press down yet. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, like coming home after a long trip. She had missed this feeling more than she realized. The men at table 12 tonight, Maria said quietly. They said that real talent comes from good families. They said working-class people like me don't have what it takes to be real musicians. Mr. Romano frowned. Those men don't know what they're talking about. My grandmother came from a poor family in Italy. Her father was a farmer who could barely read, but she could make this piano sing like an angel. Maria took a deep breath and pressed down on middle C. The note rang out clear and strong, filling the quiet restaurant with beautiful sound. The piano was out of tune, but not badly. It still had a warm, rich tone that reminded Maria of all the practice rooms at music school. It sounds wonderful, she said, pressing a few more keys. Your grandmother had good taste in pianos. She always said that music doesn't care about money or social class, Mr. Romano said, sitting down at a nearby table. She said music only cares if you have passion and if you're willing to work hard to learn. Maria played a simple scale, letting her fingers remember how to move across the keys. Her technique was a little rusty, but the muscle memory was still there. It felt amazing to make music again, even just simple exercises. Those men tonight made me so angry, Maria said, playing another scale. They acted like they knew everything about talent and success. They made me feel like I was nothing, like I didn't deserve respect because I work in a restaurant. And what do you think? Mr. Romano asked. Maria stopped playing and looked at him. I think they're wrong. I think they're lucky they were born into wealthy families, but that doesn't make them better than other people. It just makes them luckier. You're right, Mr. Romano said. Luck is not the same thing as talent or character. Maria placed her hands on the keys again and began to play a simple melody, a piece by Bach that she had learned as a teenager. The notes flowed easily from her fingers, and the old piano responded beautifully. For a few minutes, she forgot about everything else: the rude customers, the money problems, the uncertainty about her future. When she finished the piece, Mr. Romano clapped quietly. "That was beautiful, Maria. Really beautiful." "Thank you," she said, feeling more like herself than she had in months. "I have an idea," Mr. Romano said, leaning forward in his chair. "What if we had piano music during next month's talent showcase? What if you played for our customers?" Maria's heart started beating faster. The idea excited and terrified her at the same time. "I don't know, Mr. Romano. I'm just a server here. The customers might think it's strange." "You're not just a server," he said firmly. "You're a trained musician who happens to work as a server right now. There's a big difference." Maria thought about Blackstone and his friends. They would probably be back next month for the talent showcase. What would they think if they saw their clumsy waitress sitting at the piano playing classical music? "I don't have any performance clothes," Maria said, "and I'd need time to practice. This piano needs to be tuned, and I'm not sure what pieces I should play." "We can figure all of that out," Mr. Romano said with enthusiasm. "The important thing is, are you willing to try? Are you ready to show people who you really are?" Maria looked at the piano keys and then back at Mr. Romano's encouraging face. For months, she had been hiding her true self, trying to be invisible and safe. But tonight had shown her that being invisible did not protect her from cruelty or disrespect. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. Maybe it was time to remind herself and everyone else that she was more than just a waitress who spilled wine on expensive shirts. She was Maria Santos, a talented pianist who had dreams worth fighting. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm ready." The next few weeks passed quickly as Maria prepared for the upcoming talent showcase. Mr. Romano had kept his word and arranged for the piano to be tuned by a professional. When the piano tuner finished his work, the old instrument sounded better than Maria had dared to hope. The rich, warm tones filled the restaurant with beautiful music during her practice sessions. Every morning, Maria arrived at work 30 minutes early to practice. The restaurant was quiet then, with only the kitchen staff preparing for the day. She would sit at the piano bench and run through scales and exercises, slowly getting her fingers back in shape. It had been 6 months since she had played regularly, and her technique needed work. The hardest part was choosing what pieces to perform. Maria wanted to play something that would show her true abilities, but she also needed music that would appeal to a restaurant audience. Classical music could be difficult for people who were not used to it. She spent hours listening to recordings on her phone, trying to decide what would work best. Finally, she settled on 3 pieces. The first would be Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat, major, a beautiful and romantic piece that most people would find pleasant and accessible. The second would be a movement from Mozart's Piano Sonata in C major, which was more technically challenging but still melodic and engaging. For her final piece, if people seemed interested, she would play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, which was one of the most emotionally powerful pieces she knew. Mr. Romano watched her practice sometimes during slow periods. He would sit at a nearby table with his coffee and listen with a smile on his face. "You remind me so much of my grandmother," he told her one afternoon. "She had the same way of making the piano sing." "Does it bother you having someone else play her piano?" Maria asked. "No," Mr. Romano said thoughtfully. "I think it makes her happy. Music is meant to be shared, not locked away and forgotten." As the date of the talent showcase approached, Maria felt her excitement and nervousness growing. She had not performed for a real audience since her graduation recital 2 years ago. Back then, she had been confident and prepared. Now she felt rusty and uncertain. The week before the showcase, Maria made a difficult decision. She spent almost all of her tip money on a simple black dress that would be appropriate for performing. It was not expensive, but it was elegant and made her feel more like a professional musician. She also bought sheet music for her pieces, even though she had most of them memorized. Having the music nearby would make her feel more secure. On the Friday of the talent showcase, Maria arrived at work feeling more nervous than she had ever been in her life. Her hands were shaking slightly as she tied on her apron and prepared for the dinner shift. Tonight she would serve food and drinks just like always, But later she would also perform as a musician. Mr. Romano had posted a small sign near the entrance advertising live piano music during the talent showcase. He had not mentioned Maria's name or the fact that she was also a server. He wanted it to be a surprise for the customers. As the evening began, Maria noticed that many of the usual Friday night customers were there. The restaurant was full of business people, wealthy families, and couples on dates. The atmosphere was festive and excited, with everyone looking forward to the evening's entertainment. And then Maria saw them. Blackstone and his group of friends were sitting at their usual table, table 12. They were dressed in expensive suits and talking loudly about their week's business deals. Maria's stomach dropped when she saw them. These were the men who had humiliated her just a month ago. They were the ones who had said that people like her could never have real talent. For a moment, Maria considered backing out of the performance. What if she made mistakes? What if they laughed at her again? What if her playing was not good enough to change their minds about anything? But then she remembered Mr. Romano's grandmother and the old piano that had been silent for too long. She thought about all the other servers and kitchen workers who dealt with rude customers every day. She thought about her parents, who had worked so hard to give her a musical education. She could not let fear stop her from showing the world who she really was. The dinner service was busier than usual, and Maria barely had time to think about her upcoming performance. She served food, took orders, and cleaned tables just like always. When she walked past table 12, Blackstone and his friends barely looked at her. To them, she was still just the clumsy waitress who had spilled wine on an expensive shirt. Around 9 o'clock, Mr. Romano stood up in the center of the restaurant and tapped a spoon against a wine glass to get everyone's attention. The conversations gradually died down as people turned to listen. "Good evening, everyone," Mr. Romano said with a warm smile. "Welcome to Romano's monthly talent showcase. Tonight we have a very special performance for you. Our pianist will be playing some beautiful classical music on my family's piano, which hasn't been heard in this restaurant for many years." People looked around curiously, wondering who the pianist would be. Some of the regular customers had seen the old piano in the corner but had never heard anyone play it. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she was sure people could hear it. She untied her apron and hung it on a hook near the kitchen door. Underneath, she was wearing her simple black dress. She had put her hair up in a neat bun and applied a little makeup during her break. As Maria walked toward the piano, she could feel every eye in the restaurant following her. The conversation stopped completely, and the only sound was her footsteps on the tile floor. When people realized that their waitress was going to be the evening's entertainment, she heard surprised whispers and murmurs. At table 12, Blackstone looked up from his conversation with confusion and then disbelief. "Is that our waitress?" he said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "What is she doing?" One of his friends laughed. "Maybe she's going to dust the piano or something." Maria reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. She adjusted the height and arranged her sheet music, even though she probably would not need it. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she took several deep breaths to calm herself. She looked out at the audience of restaurant customers. Some faces showed curiosity and interest. Others looked skeptical or amused. At table 12, Blackstone and his friends were watching with expressions that seemed to say this was going to be entertaining in all the wrong ways. Maria placed her hands on the keys and closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing as a child, all the encouragement from her teachers, all the beautiful music that lived inside her heart. When she opened her eyes again, she felt more like herself than she had in months. "This first piece," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the quiet restaurant, "is Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was written in 1830 and is one of the most beloved pieces in the classical piano repertoire." Without another word, Maria began to play. The first notes floated through the restaurant like magic, clear and beautiful, and full of emotion. The old piano responded perfectly to her touch, its warm tones filling every corner of the room. The transformation was immediate and complete. Maria was no longer a waitress in a stained apron. She was a musician, an artist, a young woman sharing something beautiful with the world. Her posture changed. Her face became peaceful and focused, and her hands moved across the keys with the grace and skill of someone who had trained for years to do exactly this. The restaurant was absolutely silent except for the gorgeous music flowing from the piano. People at every table stopped eating and drinking, completely captivated by what they were hearing. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working and come out to listen. At table 12, the expressions on the men's faces were changing from amusement to surprise to something that looked like shock. Blackstone's mouth was slightly open, and he was staring at Maria as if he had never seen her before. As the piece continued, Maria felt all her nervousness disappearing. This was what she was meant to do. This was who she really was. The months of serving food and cleaning tables faded away, replaced by the pure joy of making beautiful music. She was home. As Maria's fingers moved gracefully across the piano keys, the Chopin Nocturne filled the restaurant with its haunting beauty. The melody was gentle at first, like a whispered secret, but it grew more passionate as the piece developed. Maria felt every note in her heart, and she could see that the music was touching the audience in the same way. She had forgotten how powerful it felt to communicate through music. Words could be misunderstood or ignored, but music spoke directly to people's emotions. It did not matter if they were rich or poor, educated or simple. Everyone could feel the beauty of what she was playing. The nocturne lasted about 4 minutes, but it felt both endless and too short at the same time. When Maria played the final soft notes, the restaurant remained completely silent for several seconds. Then suddenly, the room erupted in applause. People were clapping enthusiastically, and some were even standing up. Maria looked out at the audience and saw faces filled with surprise, admiration, and genuine appreciation. Many people seemed amazed that such beautiful music had come from their familiar Waitress. The transformation had been so complete that some customers were still trying to understand what they had just witnessed. At table 12, Blackstone was clapping slowly, his face showing a mixture of confusion and reluctant respect. His friends were also applauding, but they kept looking at each other with expressions that seemed to say, "How is this possible?" "Thank you," Maria said into the microphone that Mr. Romano had quickly brought over. Her voice was steady now, filled with the confidence that came from doing what she loved. "That was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. For my second piece, I'd like to play a movement from Mozart's Piano Sonata in C major." The applause died down as people settled back in their chairs, eager to hear more. Maria could see that she had completely captured their attention. Even the servers who were still working moved more quietly, not wanting to disturb the performance. Maria began the Mozart piece with crisp, precise notes that danced and sparkled like sunlight on water. This music was different from the Chopin, more structured and classical but equally beautiful. It required perfect technique and timing, and Maria delivered both flawlessly. As she played, Maria's confidence continued to grow. Her fingers remembered every lesson she had ever learned, every hour of practice, every piece of advice from her teachers. The music flowed through her hands as naturally as breathing. She was not thinking about notes or technique anymore. She was simply letting the music exist through her. The Mozart piece was more technically challenging than the Chopin, with rapid scales and complex rhythms that required years of training to execute properly. But Maria played it effortlessly, her hands moving with the speed and precision of a professional concert pianist. People in the audience began to realize that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This was not just a server who could play a little piano. This was a seriously trained musician, someone with real skill and artistry. The whispers grew louder as people tried to understand how they had never known about Maria's abilities. "She's incredible," Maria heard someone say at a nearby table. "Where did she learn to play like that?" Another person wondered aloud. At table 12, one of Blackstone's friends leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Blackstone shook his head slowly, looking like a man whose entire worldview was being challenged. When Maria finished the Mozart piece, the applause was even louder than before. Several people stood up again, and someone in the back of the restaurant shouted, "Bravo!" Maria smiled and nodded her thanks, feeling more alive than she had in months. But she was not finished yet. She had one more piece to play, the most challenging and emotional piece in her repertoire. This was the moment she had been building toward, the chance to show everyone exactly what she was capable of. "For my final piece tonight," Maria announced, "I'd like to play a portion of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. This is one of the most beloved pieces in the classical repertoire, and it requires everything a pianist has to give." A murmur went through the audience. Even people who did not know much about classical music had probably heard this piece before. It was famous for its emotional power and incredible technical difficulty. It was the kind of music that only the most skilled pianists attempted to perform. Maria took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. This piece would be the ultimate test of her abilities. If she could play this well, no one would ever again be able to question her talent or dismiss her dreams. The opening notes of the Rachmaninoff were soft and mysterious, like the beginning of a great love story. But Maria knew that the music would soon become much more powerful and demanding. This concerto told a story of passion, struggle, triumph, and heartbreak, all the emotions that Maria herself had experienced over the past few months. As the music developed, Maria's playing became more intense and passionate. Her whole body moved with the rhythm, and her face showed every emotion that the music contained. She was not just playing notes on a piano, she was telling her story, sharing her heart with everyone in the room. The technical demands of the piece were enormous. Maria's fingers flew across the keys in rapid passages that required perfect coordination and timing. But she had practiced this piece hundreds of times in music school, and her muscle memory guided her through even the most difficult sections. The audience was completely mesmerized. Many people had never heard live classical music before, and they were amazed by the complexity and beauty of what Maria was creating. The old piano, which had been silent for so many years, was singing with a voice more beautiful than anyone had imagined possible. As the piece reached its climactic moments, Maria played with a passion and intensity that surprised even herself. All the frustration and disappointment of the past months poured out through her fingers. All the dreams she had buried, all the talent she had hidden, all the music that had been trapped inside her heart. Everything came flowing out in a torrent of gorgeous sound. At table 12, Blackstone was no longer eating or drinking. He was staring at Maria with an expression of complete amazement. His earlier arrogance and dismissive attitude had disappeared, replaced by genuine awe. He was witnessing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about talent, class, and worth. The other customers were equally captivated. Some had tears in their eyes, moved by the emotional power of the music. Others sat with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were hearing. The transformation of their familiar waitress into this magnificent artist was almost magical to witness. Maria could feel the audience's energy feeding her performance. Their attention and appreciation gave her strength and inspiration. She played the final sections of the concerto with everything she had, holding nothing back. This was her moment to shine, her chance to show the world who she really was. When the last notes of the Rachmaninoff finally faded away, the restaurant remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if a dam had burst, the entire room exploded in the most enthusiastic applause Maria had ever heard. People were not just clapping, they were cheering, shouting, and giving her a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Maria stood up from the piano bench and curtsied gracefully, her face glowing with joy and accomplishment. She had done it. She had proven to herself and everyone else that she was exactly who she had always known herself to be, a real musician with genuine talent and something beautiful to offer the world. The standing ovation seemed to last forever. Maria stood beside the piano, feeling overwhelmed by the response from the audience. She had dreamed of moments like this during her years in music school, but she had never imagined it would happen in a restaurant while wearing a simple black dress and serving tables. As the applause continued, Maria looked around the room at all the faces. She saw genuine admiration, surprise, and respect in people's eyes. These were the same customers she had been serving for months, but now they were seeing her completely differently. She was no longer invisible. Mr. Romano appeared beside her, with the biggest smile she had ever seen on his face. He took the microphone and waited for the applause to quiet down slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice filled with pride, "I think we can all agree that we have just witnessed something truly special. Maria Santos, everyone." The applause started up again, even louder than before. Maria felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but they were tears of joy and relief. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. As the ovation finally began to die down, Maria noticed movement at table 12. Richard Blackstone was standing up slowly, his face showing an expression she had never seen before. Gone was the arrogant smirk and dismissive attitude. Instead, he looked humbled and deeply impressed. Blackstone began walking toward the piano, and the restaurant gradually became quiet as people noticed what was happening. This was the man who had been so cruel to Maria just a month ago. Everyone was curious to see what he would say now. When Blackstone reached the piano, he stopped a few feet away from Maria and looked at her for a long moment. His face showed a mixture of shame, respect, and amazement. "Miss Santos," he said quietly, but loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I owe you an apology, a very sincere apology." Maria looked at him carefully, not sure what to expect. She remembered the humiliation she had felt when he yelled at her about the spilled wine. She remembered his cruel words about people like her not having real talent. "What I said to you last month was wrong," Blackstone continued, his voice becoming stronger. "I was rude, disrespectful, and completely mistaken about who you are and what you're capable of. I judged you based on your job instead of seeing you as a person with your own talents and dreams." The restaurant was completely silent now. Everyone was listening to this unexpected apology, and many people seemed to understand that something important was happening. "I've been going to concerts at Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center for 20 years, Blackstone said, shaking his head in amazement. "I've heard some of the world's best pianists perform, and what you just played was as beautiful and skillful as anything I've ever heard." Maria felt her heart racing. This was the same man who had said that real talent was bred, not learned. The same man who had insisted that working-class people could never achieve true excellence in music. "I was wrong about everything," Blackstone admitted, looking directly into Maria's eyes. "Talent has nothing to do with family background or social class. It has to do with skill, passion, and hard work. You obviously have all three in abundance." He paused for a moment, then extended his hand to Maria. "Would you accept my apology and my respect?" Maria looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. She could see that his apology was genuine. The arrogance and cruelty were gone, replaced by humility and sincere regret. "Yes," she said simply, taking his hand and shaking it firmly. "I accept your apology." The restaurant erupted in applause again. This time not just for Maria's performance, but for the grace she had shown in accepting Blackstone's apology. It was a moment that showed the power of both music and forgiveness. But Blackstone was not finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card which he handed to Maria. "I meant what I said about your talent," he told her. "My company is opening a new cultural center downtown next month. We're looking for someone to direct our music program. Someone who can teach, perform, and help us create something special for the community." Maria's eyes widened as she looked at the business card. This was the kind of opportunity she had been dreaming about for 2 years. "The position pays $60,000 a year to start," Blackstone continued, "plus benefits and the chance to perform regularly. We would also provide a piano for your use and help you continue your musical education if you're interested." Maria felt like she might faint. $60,000 was more money than she had ever imagined making, especially doing something she loved. It would be enough to pay off her student loans and still have money left over for a decent apartment. "But," she said carefully, "why would you offer this to me? You don't even know if I can teach or organize programs." Blackstone smiled for the first time since she had known him. Anyone who can play Rachmaninoff like that has the musical knowledge and sensitivity to teach others. And anyone who has the courage to perform like you just did, after working as a server all day, has the strength of character to lead a program. Maria looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching this conversation. Mr. Romano was beaming, with pride. The other servers and kitchen staff were smiling and nodding encouragingly. Even Blackstone's friends at table 12 looked impressed and supportive. "There's one more thing," Blackstone added. "The Cultural Center will have a concert hall that seats 300 people. Part of your job would be to perform there regularly. Solo recitals, chamber music, whatever you want to do. We want to bring real classical music to the community." Maria felt her dream suddenly becoming real in a way she had never expected. A job doing what she loved, regular performance opportunities, and the chance to share music with others. It was everything she had hoped for when she graduated from music school. "I don't know what to say," Maria said honestly. "Say you'll think about it," Blackstone replied. "Take some time to consider the offer. But I hope you'll say yes. After what I heard tonight, I think you could help us create something really special." Maria looked at the business card again, then back at Blackstone's face. This was the man who had humiliated her just a month ago, and now he was offering her the chance to change her entire life. "Mr. Blackstone," she said thoughtfully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. What changed your mind about people like me? About talent and social class and all the things you said before?" Blackstone was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "You did," he said finally. "Tonight you showed me that I was wrong about almost everything I thought I knew. Real talent doesn't come from privilege or connections. It comes from passion, hard work, and the courage to share your gifts with the world." He gestured toward the piano. "What you did tonight took more courage than anything I've ever done in business. You knew that people might judge you or laugh at you, but you performed anyway. That's not just talent. That's character." Maria felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This was more than just a job offer. It was recognition of who she really was and what she had to offer. "I'd like to accept your offer," she said, surprising herself with how quickly she made the decision. "When would you like me to start?" Blackstone's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "How about Monday? We can spend the first week planning the program and getting you familiar with the facility. The concert hall should be ready in about 3 weeks. Maria nodded, feeling like she was in a dream. Just a few hours ago, she had been a struggling waitress with seemingly no future in music. Now she was about to start a new career doing exactly what she had always wanted to do. As news of the job offer spread through the restaurant, the applause and cheering started up again. Customers were congratulating both Maria and Blackstone, celebrating this unexpected happy ending to what had started as a simple dinner out. 6 months later, Maria stood on the stage of the Blackstone Cultural Center, looking out at an audience of 300 people. She was wearing an elegant blue evening gown, and her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo. The concert hall was beautiful, with perfect acoustics and a gorgeous grand piano that had been purchased specifically for her performances. Tonight was her first major solo recital as the director of the Cultural Center's music program. The tickets had sold out, within a week of going on sale, and there was a waiting list of people hoping to attend future performances. Maria had become something of a local celebrity, known not just for her musical talent but for her inspiring story of transformation. As she sat down at the piano bench, Maria thought about how much her life had changed since that night at Romano's restaurant. The struggling waitress who had spilled wine on expensive shirts seemed like a different person entirely. But in many ways, she was still the same Maria, just finally living the life she had always been meant to live. Her job at the Cultural Center had exceeded even her highest expectations. She taught private piano lessons to students of all ages, from young children just beginning to learn to adults who had always dreamed of playing music. She also directed a community choir and organized concerts featuring both local and visiting musicians. The center had become a hub of musical activity in the city. Every week brought new students, new performers, and new audiences discovering the joy of classical music. Maria had helped create exactly what Blackstone had envisioned, a place where music could bring people together regardless of their background or social status. Her relationship with Blackstone had evolved from employer and employee to genuine friendship and mutual respect. He often attended her performances and had become one of her strongest supporters. The man who had once dismissed working-class people as lacking real talent now regularly spoke about the importance of giving everyone opportunities to develop their gifts. "Good evening, everyone," Maria said into the microphone, her voice confident and warm. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Before I begin playing, I'd like to tell you about this program and why tonight is so special to me." She paused and looked around the audience, recognizing many familiar faces. In the front row sat Mr. Romano and several of her former co-workers from the restaurant. They had become her biggest fans and never missed one of her performances. Maria's parents had driven 3 hours from their hometown and were sitting in the third row, beaming with pride. "The pieces I've chosen tonight represent a journey," Maria continued. "They tell the story of struggle, perseverance, and the triumph of hope over despair. This music has sustained me through difficult times and reminded me that beauty and art can exist even in the darkest moments." Near the back of the hall, Maria spotted a group of young people who looked like they might be college students. She had specifically set aside discounted tickets for students because she remembered what it was like to love music, but not have much money. Everyone deserved the chance to experience live classical music, regardless of their financial situation. 6 months ago, I was working as a waitress at Romano's Italian restaurant, Maria said, causing a murmur of recognition to go through the audience. Many people had heard her story by now, but it still moved them to hear her tell it herself. I had almost given up on my dream of being a professional musician. Student loans, bills, and the struggle to survive had nearly convinced me that I was foolish to believe I could make a living doing what I loved. But one night, I sat down at an old piano that hadn't been played in years, and everything changed. She gestured toward the audience. That night taught me that we never know when our moment will come. We never know when the opportunity will arise to show the world who we really are. The key is to be ready when that moment arrives, and to have the courage to take it. Maria positioned her hands above the piano keys. Tonight's program begins with the same piece I played that night at Romano's, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But this time, I'm playing it not as someone hiding her talents, but as someone who has learned to embrace them fully. As she began to play, the familiar melody filled the concert hall with its haunting beauty. But Maria's interpretation had deepened over the past 6 months. Her technique was even more polished, and her emotional expression had grown richer and more nuanced. The months of regular practice and performance had elevated her artistry to a new level. The audience listened in rapt attention as Maria moved through her program. She played works by Mozart, Beethoven, Rachmaninoff, and contemporary composers, each piece chosen to showcase different aspects of her musicianship. Her technical skill was flawless, but more importantly, her ability to communicate emotion through music was extraordinary. During the intermission, people crowded around the lobby discussing what they had heard. Many audience members were discovering classical music for the first time, while others were longtime fans who recognized that they were witnessing something special. "She's incredible," one elderly woman said to her companion. "I've been going to concerts for 50 years and I've rarely heard playing this sensitive and powerful. And to think she was serving tables just 6 months ago," her friend replied. "It just shows you never know what talents people are hiding." In the VIP section, Blackstone sat with several other business leaders who had become supporters of the cultural center. The success of Maria's program had exceeded everyone's expectations, and there was already talk of expanding to include other musical ensembles and educational programs. When Maria returned for the second half of the concert, she had changed into a different gown, a stunning black dress that made her look like a true concert artist. The transformation from waitress to acclaimed musician was now complete in every visible way. For the final piece of tonight's program, Maria announced, "I'd like to play something that holds special meaning for me. This is Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the same piece I played on that life-changing night at Romano's. But tonight, I'm playing it with the knowledge that dreams can come true, even when they seem impossible." As she began the opening notes of the Rachmaninoff, Maria felt a profound sense of gratitude and accomplishment. Every struggle of the past few years had led to this moment. Every rejection, Every financial worry, every day of serving food while dreaming of music, it had all been worth it to arrive at this place. The concerto built to its powerful climax, and Maria played with a passion and intensity that brought many audience members to tears. She was not just performing music. She was sharing her story, her heart, and her triumph over adversity. When the final notes faded away, the audience rose as one in a thunderous standing ovation. People were cheering, crying, and calling out, "Bravo!" The applause went on for several minutes, with Maria taking bow after bow as flowers were brought to the stage. As she stood there accepting the audience's appreciation, Maria thought about the young woman who had once felt invisible and unimportant, that Maria had believed that her dreams were too big, her background too ordinary, her circumstances too difficult to overcome. But tonight proved that none of those things mattered. What mattered was talent, hard work, and the courage to believe in yourself even when others don't. What mattered was taking advantage of opportunities when they arise and never giving up on the person you know you can become. After the concert, as Maria greeted audience members in the lobby, she was approached by a young woman who looked to be about college age. The girl's eyes were bright with excitement and inspiration. "Miss Santos," the girl said nervously, "I'm a music student at the local college. I've been struggling to make ends meet and was thinking about quitting school to get a regular job. But after hearing you tonight and learning about your story, I think I'm going to stick with it." Maria smiled and took the girl's hands in hers. "Never give up on your dreams," she said warmly. "The world needs your music, even if it doesn't. Know it yet. Keep practicing, keep believing, and be ready for your moment when it comes." As Maria drove home that night, she passed by Romano's restaurant. The old building looked exactly the same as always, warm and welcoming with light spilling out of its windows. She could see people inside enjoying their dinners, and she wondered if any of them had dreams they were keeping secret. Tomorrow Maria would return to her work at the cultural center, teaching students and planning future concerts. She would continue building the music program and helping others discover their own hidden talents. But tonight, she was simply grateful for the journey that had brought her here and the proof that sometimes the most beautiful transformations happen when we find the courage to show the world who we really are. The girl who had once been invisible had finally learned to shine, and her light was now helping others find their own way out of the darkness.